My sister-in-law faked a stalker during our honeymoon, demanding we come home before he killed her. My sister-in-law Megan has hated me since the day we met. When Ryan proposed, she cried for 3 days. When we set our wedding date, she scheduled emergency surgery that day, forcing us to postpone. We eloped instead. She wore black to our small ceremony, called it appropriate for a funeral. Our honeymoon to Bali was kept secret. Only Ryan's parents knew we'd left the country, not where. 4 days in, at 3 a.m., my phone exploded. 17 missed calls, texts from Ryan's entire family. Come home now. Megan's in danger. Ryan called his mother. Through sobs, she explained, Megan had a stalker. He'd been leaving dead roses, photos of her sleeping, threatening notes. Tonight he'd tried breaking in. She was barricaded in her bathroom. Police couldn't find him. We have to go. Ryan was already packing. Wait, Megan lives in a security building. How is someone leaving things at her door? Does it matter? She's terrified. I checked Megan's Instagram. Posted 2 hours ago. Selfie at a wine bar, captioned, living my best life while some people abandon family for beaches. Ryan, she's at a bar, not barricaded in a bathroom. She probably posted it earlier, but her friend's story showed Megan there an hour ago, doing shots. Ryan still insisted we leave. The next flight was in 18 hours. We lost thousands on non-refundable bookings. During our 23-hour journey back, his family sent updates. The stalker had escalated. Broken windows, slashed tires, a mannequin dressed like Megan hanging from a tree. Something bothered me about the photos. The broken glass fell outward, not inward. The tire cuts were too precise. The mannequin wore jewelry Megan had posted yesterday. We landed exhausted. At Megan's apartment, she answered looking perfect. Full makeup, fresh manicure. Not someone terrorized for days. Thank God you're here. She threw herself at Ryan. No actual tears. The apartment was pristine. No damage, no police tape. Where's all the damage? Building fixed everything immediately. At 3 a.m., in 2 days, she showed us the stalker's letters. Same handwriting trying to look different. Same paper. Same pen. The blood looked like paint. Then the smoking gun. A photo the stalker supposedly took of her sleeping. I recognized it from her Instagram 6 months ago. She'd deleted it, but I had screenshots. She's faking this, I told Ryan. You're serious? Ask her for the detective's information. Ryan confronted her. What detective is handling this? What precinct? The main one. He said not to share information. For safety. Show me the police report. I filed it online. Show me the confirmation. She fumbled with her phone, then gasped. Oh my God, he just texted me. He's watching right now. A text from unknown appeared, but I saw her tap her Apple Watch first. You can send texts from your watch to your phone. Text him back, I challenged. Ask where he is. She glared at me with pure hatred, but typed. No response came, because she couldn't make her watch receive a response she hadn't programmed. Then Ryan's mom screamed. On her phone was an Instagram livestream. Someone in a black mask sitting in Megan's bedroom. Account name, Megan's Real Stalker. Everyone ran to check Megan's room, but I studied the stream. In the mirror's reflection, I caught distinctive wallpaper. That wasn't Megan's room. It was her friend Ashley's apartment. I texted Ashley, is Josh at your apartment? Yeah, doing some prank for Megan. She's paying me $500. The masked figure held up a sign. If they don't leave forever, she dies tonight. Then the stream switched. Security footage from our Bali hotel. A masked figure at our door. From 3 hours ago. You had someone at our hotel? Ryan asked. Megan actually smiled. I have friends everywhere. Her phone rang. A distorted voice on speaker. Did they get my message? But I heard Ashley's parrot in the background. That's Josh calling from Ashley's. Megan hung up, her face white. My phone buzzed. Security footage from Bali. The masked figure removing their mask. It was Megan herself. You flew to Bali, I said. You followed us. She'd been there 3 hours ago. But that was impossible. She was here when we called. Unless, I checked metadata on the family photos from the last 2 days. All taken 3 days ago. Before we'd even left. Everything was pre-staged. Prove it, Megan said coldly. Another video arrived. Someone inside our hotel room placing something under the bed. Multiple tracking devices. And something wrapped in plastic. What did you put in our room? Ryan demanded. Megan's smile widened. Check your luggage when you get home. If you can get home. Ryan's phone rang. Airport security. Mr. Finley? We need you back immediately. We found something concerning in your luggage during a random check. Drugs. Significant quantities. Your luggage is being held pending investigation. I stood frozen in the middle of the terminal while people rushed past us with their rolling suitcases and coffee cups. My phone felt heavy in my hand. The security officer's words still echoing in my head about needing us back immediately. Ryan's face had gone completely white. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. We both knew exactly what Megan had done. She'd planted drugs in our luggage. Real or fake, it didn't matter because we were about to be detained either way. Ryan grabbed my hand and we started walking back toward baggage claim, my legs shaking with each step. Other travelers glanced at us as we passed, probably wondering why we looked so scared. A uniformed officer met us at the entrance to the baggage area and gestured for us to follow him down a side hallway. He didn't say anything, just walked with his hand near his belt where his radio sat. We entered a small windowless room with gray walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. Our suitcases sat open on a metal table, clothes spilling out everywhere. A woman in a Navy security uniform stood beside the table, her expression neutral but alert. She introduced herself as Hope Ferguson, the security supervisor on duty. Her colleague Macy stood on the other side of the table, wearing similar uniform and holding a clipboard. Macy explained they'd pulled our bags for random screening, which made my stomach drop because random meant they had no reason to suspect us specifically until they found something. She pointed to the bottom of my suitcase where the lining had been peeled back. Multiple plastic packages sat there, white powder visible through the clear wrapping. My heart hammered against my ribs. Ryan made a choking sound beside me. Macy said the packages appeared to contain cocaine based on preliminary visual inspection, and they'd found similar packages in Ryan's bag too. Hope asked us to have a seat while they processed the situation. I couldn't sit. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the video Megan had sent, the one showing someone in our hotel room. Hope's expression didn't change as she watched it. I tried to explain about Megan's threat, about her saying to check our luggage, about the entire fake stalking scheme. Hope listened without interrupting, then said they had to follow protocol regardless of family drama. Ryan jumped in, his voice cracking as he tried to explain his sister's history of sabotage. He told them about the wedding interference, the fake emergency surgery, everything. Hope nodded but said they still needed to test the substances and complete their investigation. 2 airport police officers entered the room before Ryan could finish talking. They asked us to come with them for formal questioning. My mouth went dry. We were being detained. Actually detained like criminals because of what Megan planted. The officers separated us immediately. I got led to a different room down the hall, smaller than the first one with just a table and 2 chairs. A detective in plain clothes sat across from me and started asking questions. Where had we traveled? How long were we gone? Did we pack our own bags? Did anyone have access to our luggage? I answered everything truthfully, but my voice kept shaking. Then he asked about drug history. Had either of us ever used illegal substances? Did we have any drug contacts? I said no repeatedly, feeling more panicked with each question. He asked about Megan next. What was our relationship like? Had there been conflicts? Why would she want to frame us? I tried to explain how she'd hated me from the start, how she'd sabotaged our wedding, how she'd faked an entire stalking situation to ruin our honeymoon. Saying it out loud made it sound completely insane. The detective wrote notes, but his face stayed blank. I realized how this looked to him. Some family drama excuse while sitting here with drugs in our luggage. I showed him my phone, scrolling through all the evidence I'd collected. The Instagram posts proving Megan wasn't actually in danger. The metadata from the family photos showing they were taken before we left. The video of her admitting she had someone at our hotel. The security footage from Bali showing her in the mask. He watched everything carefully, asked me to send him copies of the files, but I could tell he wasn't sure whether to believe me. 3 hours crawled by in that tiny room. The detective left and came back multiple times, asking the same questions in different ways. My throat hurt from talking. My head pounded from the fluorescent lights. I kept thinking about Megan's smile when she said we might not make it home. Finally, Hope appeared in the doorway. She asked me to come with her back to the original room where they'd shown us the drugs. Ryan was already there, looking exhausted and scared. Hope sat down across from us and said the preliminary tests had come back. The substances weren't cocaine. They were a mixture of baking soda, powdered sugar, and flour designed to look like drugs. Relief hit me so hard I almost fell over. Ryan grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight. But Hope explained this actually changed everything about the investigation. If someone wanted us arrested for trafficking, they would have planted real drugs. Fake drugs meant someone wanted us detained and investigated, wanted us to go through exactly what we'd just gone through. It supported our story about a frame job. She said they were taking our allegations about Megan very seriously now. Macy came back into the room with an older woman who had the same sharp eyes and direct manner. Macy introduced her as Detective Lorraine Ferguson, her mother, who worked for the local police department. Lorraine specialized in harassment and stalking cases. She sat down and asked us to tell her everything from the beginning. We went through the whole story again, starting with Megan's reaction to our engagement. Lorraine listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When we got to the fake stalking scheme, her expression grew more serious. She watched all the videos on my phone, studied the metadata, examined the security footage. Then she looked up and said, Megan had committed multiple serious crimes. Planting fake drugs to trigger a law enforcement investigation was itself illegal. Combined with the stalking hoax, interstate travel for harassment, filing false police reports, and the tracking devices, Megan could face federal charges. Lorraine pulled out her phone and called someone named Fletcher. She explained the situation quickly and asked him to come examine our luggage for fingerprints and DNA evidence. Within an hour, a man arrived carrying a large black case full of equipment. Fletcher was Lorraine's husband, a forensics expert who worked with the police department. He greeted us briefly, then got to work processing our suitcases. He dusted the false bottom panels with powder, used special lights, took photographs of everything. I watched him work, barely breathing. He found clear fingerprints on the panels, definitely not ours based on size and pattern. He explained they'd run these through databases, but more importantly, he'd noticed something about the construction. The false bottoms required specific tools and planning to create. Someone had carefully measured and cut the panels, attached them with precise adhesive application. This proved premeditation. showed Megan had planned this for weeks or longer. It contradicted any claim this was an impulsive act. Ryan finally broke. He'd been holding it together through everything, but watching Fletcher document the evidence of his sister's crimes made him crumble. He started crying, apologizing over and over. He said he'd always known Megan had problems but never imagined she'd go this far. I pulled him close while he sobbed against my shoulder. My own anger mixed with heartbreak, because his family had put us through this nightmare. Hope quietly stepped out of the room to give us privacy. Fletcher kept working, carefully bagging evidence. Lorraine made phone calls, her voice low and serious. After Fletcher finished his initial processing, Lorraine said she needed to contact the FBI. Megan's trip to Bali to harass us potentially involved international jurisdiction. Crossing borders to commit crimes was a federal matter. She made the call right there, explaining the situation to whoever answered. Within 2 hours, a woman in a dark suit arrived at the security office. She introduced herself as Aurora Hensley, federal agent assigned to investigate potential international crimes. Aurora was maybe 40, with sharp features and direct eyes that missed nothing. She immediately requested all the evidence, watching every video, examining Fletcher's preliminary findings, reviewing the timeline we'd constructed. She said crossing international borders to commit crimes dramatically increased the potential penalties Megan faced. Federal charges carried much harsher sentences than state charges. Aurora started making her own calls, coordinating with other agencies. She asked for our hotel information in Bali, said she needed to secure all available security footage. Her efficiency was almost scary, but also reassuring because someone was finally taking this seriously. I sat frozen in the uncomfortable plastic chair while Aurora made call after call, her voice sharp and professional as she coordinated with different agencies. She mentioned her sister worked customs in Bali and could pull security footage from our hotel within hours. I watched her pace back and forth, phone pressed to her ear, explaining the situation in quick, clipped sentences that made everything sound even more serious than it already felt. Ryan sat next to me with his head in his hands, completely silent after his breakdown. Hope brought us bottles of water and quietly mentioned we should try to drink something since we'd been sitting there for over 3 hours without eating or drinking anything. The water tasted like plastic, but I forced myself to swallow it anyway. Aurora ended her call and turned to face us with an expression I couldn't quite read. She explained that her sister Jillian would review all available footage from the hotel and send it directly to her secure email within the next few hours. The cooperation from Bali authorities would be crucial since Megan's actions crossed international borders, which made this a federal case instead of just local harassment. I felt a weird mix of relief and terror because federal charges sounded incredibly serious, but also meant people were taking this seriously enough to actually do something. Aurora sat down across from us and pulled out a tablet, pulling up what looked like legal documents and case files. She walked us through what would happen next, explaining they needed to build an airtight case before arresting Megan, because someone with her resources and planning ability might try to flee if she realized she was under investigation. Ryan finally looked up and asked how long this would take, his voice hoarse from crying. Aurora's answer wasn't comforting because she said federal investigations typically took weeks or months, not days, and we needed to be patient while they gathered every piece of evidence. My stomach dropped at the thought of Megan walking around free for weeks knowing what she'd done to us. Hope's phone buzzed and she stepped out to take the call, returning minutes later with Fletcher, who carried a large black evidence bag. He'd finished his initial processing and wanted to show us what he'd found. The fingerprints on the false bottom panels were clear and distinct, definitely not matching our prints based on size and ridge patterns. Fletcher explained they'd run these through multiple databases including criminal records and immigration files, but more importantly, he'd noticed something about how the panels were constructed. Someone had carefully measured and cut precise panels, attached them with specific adhesive that required planning and preparation. This wasn't something done impulsively or quickly. The panels showed tool marks consistent with professional carpentry equipment, suggesting Megan had either built them herself with proper tools or paid someone skilled to create them. Aurora leaned forward, studying the photos Fletcher had taken of the adhesive patterns. She pointed out that the application was too precise and even to be amateur work, which meant either Megan had practiced this technique multiple times or she'd hired help. Either scenario proved extensive premeditation. Ryan made a choking sound and I realized he was crying again. Quietly this time. Tears just streaming down his face without any sobs. I grabbed his hand and squeezed it, but didn't know what to say because what could anyone say when your sister tried to get you arrested for drug trafficking? Aurora's phone chimed and she immediately opened her email, her eyes scanning rapidly across the screen. She turned the tablet toward us and pressed play on a video file. The footage showed the exterior of our Bali hotel, timestamp clearly visible in the corner, dated 3 days before we'd even left for our trip. My breath caught as I watched a woman who was definitely Megan walk through the front entrance pulling a small suitcase, wearing sunglasses and a hat, but unmistakably her based on body language and the distinctive bracelet she always wore. Fletcher zoomed in on specific frames, enhancing the image quality to show Megan's face clearly visible when she turned to speak to someone at the front desk. Aurora scrolled to the next video, which showed interior hallway footage from our floor. Megan appeared again, this time following a housekeeper and engaging her in conversation. The housekeeper swiped her keycard and entered a room to clean it, and when she came back out moments later, Megan was gone. But the housekeeper looked confused, patting her pockets. The next clip showed Megan using a keycard to access our room 40 minutes later. She glanced around the hallway first, clearly checking for witnesses, then swiped the stolen card and slipped inside. The timestamp showed she spent exactly 37 minutes in our room. When she emerged, her small suitcase looked flatter and lighter. Aurora pulled up another file, and this one made my blood run cold. The footage showed Megan in what appeared to be a hotel stairwell, holding up a phone and filming herself while wearing the same black mask from the video she'd sent us earlier. She pulled the mask on and off several times, clearly checking the camera angle and lighting. The timestamp proved she filmed this exactly when Ryan's family claimed she was barricaded in her bathroom hiding from a stalker. Ryan made a sound like he'd been punched. His sister had been in Bali, in our hotel, planting evidence and filming fake stalker videos while their parents called us crying about how terrified she was. The level of planning and deception was staggering. Aurora explained that Jillian was sending more footage, including airport security showing Megan's arrival and departure from Bali, which would establish a complete timeline. She'd also contacted the hotel security director, someone named Stephen McCarthy, who was fully cooperating and providing additional footage from their private security system. Within another hour, more files arrived. Stephen had sent footage from multiple camera angles showing Megan's movements throughout the hotel. One clip showed her in the business center using a computer, and Stephen had included screenshots of her browser history from that session. She'd been researching how to create false compartments in luggage, and what substances could be mistaken for drugs during airport screening. Another video showed her in the hotel gift shop purchasing zip ties and duct tape. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Fletcher started laying out printed photos on the table, creating a visual timeline of Megan's actions. Arrival at hotel 3 days before we left home. Theft of housekeeper keycard. Entry into our room with stolen access. Filming of fake stalker footage in stairwell. Purchase of materials. Research on drug detection. The pattern was clear and damning. Aurora made more calls, speaking rapidly to prosecutors and other federal agents. She kept using phrases like premeditated felony and interstate conspiracy that made everything sound even more serious. Hope brought us sandwiches from somewhere, but I couldn't eat, just stared at the evidence spread across the table. Ryan finally spoke, asking Aurora directly what charges Megan would face. Aurora's list was long and frightening. Filing false police reports, interstate stalking, fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, illegal surveillance, identity theft for the phone cloning. Possibly more charges depending on what else they discovered. Each charge carried potential prison time, and federal sentences were typically harsher than state charges. The total potential sentence could be years, not months. My hands started shaking as the reality sank in. Megan had committed serious federal crimes against us, and there was video evidence of everything. She couldn't lie her way out of this. She couldn't manipulate her way free. The evidence was concrete and undeniable. Aurora's phone rang again, and she answered immediately, listening intently before her expression shifted to something almost satisfied. She thanked whoever was on the line and ended the call, turning to face us with the first hint of a smile I'd seen from her. Stefan had provided one more crucial piece of footage. Hotel security cameras had captured Megan removing her mask in a service hallway, clearly showing her face, and the timestamp matched exactly with when the family group chat showed her mother posting about the stalker breaking in. The final piece of evidence that proved without any doubt the entire stalking story was completely fabricated. Ryan buried his face in his hands again. I felt sick and relieved and furious all at once, emotions swirling so fast I couldn't separate them. Aurora explained they had everything they needed to build an airtight federal case, but warned us this would take time. They needed to obtain warrants, coordinate with multiple agencies, ensure every piece of evidence was properly documented and legally obtained. She estimated we were looking at several weeks before they could arrest Megan, maybe longer. The warning that stuck with me most was when Aurora said we should expect Megan to retaliate once she realized she was under investigation. People like her, who planned elaborate schemes, didn't just accept consequences quietly. We needed to be careful and vigilant. Finally, after 8 hours in that airport security office, Aurora said we were free to go. We weren't being charged with anything. The fake drugs had been logged as evidence against Megan. Our luggage would be returned after Fletcher finished processing it completely. Hope walked us out, apologizing for the initial detention, but explaining they had to follow protocol. She gave us her card and said to call immediately if anything else happened. The terminal felt surreal after being locked in that office for so long. Other travelers rushed past us heading to their flights, completely oblivious to the nightmare we'd just been through. Ryan's phone was dead, so I pulled out mine to call us a cab. That's when I remembered his mother. She'd been so cheerful on the phone earlier, so smug about teaching us a lesson. My hands shook with rage as I dialed her number using my phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and falsely concerned, asking if we'd learned our lesson about abandoning family. I didn't let her finish. I told her the police knew everything, that Megan was facing federal charges, that we had video evidence of her in Bali planting evidence in our hotel room. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she started screaming. Her voice went shrill and panicked, yelling about how we were destroying the family. How could we involve authorities in private family matters? This was between family and should stay between family. I held the phone away from my ear as she shrieked about betrayal and disloyalty. Ryan grabbed the phone from my hand, his face set in an expression I'd never seen before. His voice came out steady and cold, completely different from his earlier crying. He told his mother that Megan had committed multiple federal crimes, endangered our freedom and future, Cost us our entire honeymoon savings and our sense of safety. He said he was done protecting Megan from consequences of her own actions, done enabling her behavior, done pretending her obsessive jealousy was normal sibling rivalry. His mother tried interrupting, but Ryan spoke over her, explaining that if his parents continued enabling Megan and refusing to acknowledge the severity of her crimes, they would be permanently cut out of our lives. His mother's voice shifted to the guilt trip approach, talking about family loyalty and forgiveness, and how siblings fight but always make up. Ryan interrupted her mid-sentence to point out that Megan had literally tried to get us arrested for drug trafficking, which could have destroyed our careers, our futures, possibly sent us to prison. She didn't pull a prank or start a fight. She committed serious federal crimes with the intention of ruining our lives. He hung up on her while she was still talking, powered off his phone completely, and told me we weren't speaking to any of his family until after Megan was arrested. We took a cab home, and the apartment felt strange after everything. Ryan collapsed on the couch, and I checked under our bed like Aurora told me to. 3 tracking devices were stuck to the frame with industrial adhesive. I took photos from every angle and dropped them into evidence bags Aurora had given us. My hands shook while I sealed each bag and wrote the date and time on the labels. Ryan watched me from the doorway and asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer because I wasn't okay, and wouldn't be for a long time. We ordered takeout because neither of us could think about cooking and ate in silence while staring at our phones waiting for updates from Aurora. 2 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. Aurora's voice was crisp and professional as she explained the warrants were being executed right now at 3 locations simultaneously. Federal agents were at Megan's apartment, local police were at Ashley's place, and another team was searching Ryan's parents' house. She said we should stay home and she'd call with updates. Ryan made coffee with trembling hands, and we sat at the kitchen table refreshing news sites every few minutes. An hour later, Aurora called back. At Megan's apartment, they found her laptop in a desk drawer with a folder labeled Operation Honeymoon, containing detailed spreadsheets. The documents listed every expense for her Bali trip, timeline breakdowns showing when she planted each piece of evidence, and notes about mixing household ingredients to look like cocaine under casual inspection. She'd written reminders to herself about staging the fake stalking photos, and had saved drafts of the threatening letters with edits and revisions like she was working on a school project. Aurora said the laptop also contained research about drug trafficking penalties and airport security procedures. Megan had Googled, "How long does TSA hold luggage for drug investigation?" and "Can you go to jail for fake drugs in luggage?" which proved she knew exactly what she was doing and understood the potential consequences. The forensics team was copying everything, and Aurora promised the evidence was overwhelming. She hung up to coordinate with the other search teams and told us to expect more calls soon. 30 minutes later, she called again. Ashley and Josh were arrested at Ashley's apartment after police found the black mask from the live stream, a prepaid phone with the stalker texts still in the message history, and Ashley's bank records showing a $3,000 deposit from Megan 2 weeks before our wedding. Ashley started crying immediately and told the officers she wanted to cooperate. She gave a full statement explaining Megan paid her to help with what Megan called a harmless prank to cut our honeymoon short. Josh admitted he wore the mask and made the distorted phone call, but claimed he thought it was just a joke between siblings. Both were charged as accomplices, but Aurora said Ashley's cooperation would help her get reduced charges, while Josh would face more serious penalties for his active participation. The third call came an hour after that. At Ryan's parents' house, the search team found Ryan's mother's laptop in the home office. Her email account contained dozens of messages between her and Megan coordinating the fake emergency. The emails started 3 weeks before our wedding with Megan writing that she had a plan to ruin our honeymoon. Ryan's mother responded asking for details, and Megan laid out the entire fake stalking scheme. His mother's replies were enthusiastic and encouraging. She wrote things like, "Are you sure this will work? And what if they don't come back? And maybe we should add more details to make it believable." The emails proved she wasn't fooled by Megan's story, but was actively helping plan and execute the hoax. When officers questioned her, she tried claiming she thought it was real, but they showed her the printed emails and her face went white. She demanded a lawyer and refused to say anything else. Ryan put his head in his hands and sobbed. His mother had betrayed him as completely as Megan had. I rubbed his back while he cried and felt my own anger building. His entire family had conspired to destroy our happiness, and they'd almost succeeded. Aurora called one more time that afternoon to say Megan was arrested at her office. Federal agents walked into her workplace at 2 in the afternoon and arrested her in front of her coworkers and boss. She was charged with filing false police reports, interstate stalking, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. At the bail hearing, Aurora argued Megan was a flight risk because she'd already proven her willingness to travel internationally to harass victims, and she had the financial means to flee the country. The judge set bail at $100,000, and Megan was taken to county jail. That evening, Ryan's father called. He'd bailed Megan out and hired a criminal defense attorney. The lawyer called our phones within an hour, leaving messages about settling this matter privately. He suggested we were overreacting, and this was just sibling rivalry gone too far. He said families should handle disputes internally without involving the legal system. I deleted his voicemail and blocked his number. Ryan did the same. Aurora connected us with Cadence Fowler, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in harassment cases. Cadence was a sharp woman in her 40s with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes. She met us at her office that evening and listened to our entire story without interrupting. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair and said she was genuinely outraged by what Megan had done. She promised to make sure Megan faced serious consequences and told us we should not speak to Megan's attorney or anyone from Ryan's family without her present. Cadence explained we had grounds for a civil lawsuit beyond the criminal charges. We could sue for our honeymoon costs, therapy expenses, lost wages from missing work, and damages for emotional distress. She estimated we could recover at least $50,000 and possibly more depending on how the criminal case went. She asked detailed questions about our financial losses and took notes on everything. By the time we left her office, it was past 9 at night and I felt exhausted, but slightly hopeful that someone was fighting for us. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7. A reporter from the local news had found our names in the public arrest records and wanted an interview about Megan's arrest. I hung up without responding. More reporters called throughout the day. Ryan's phone was blowing up too. Cadence called and told us to decline all media requests and not discuss the case publicly. She said anything we said could be used against us later, and media attention might prejudice potential jurors. But the story spread anyway. By that afternoon, it was all over social media. People we hadn't talked to in years were messaging us, asking if it was true. The local news ran a story about the elaborate stalking hoax and Megan's arrest. Online comments expressed shock at the scheme, and several people said they hoped Megan went to prison for a long time. Ryan's phone rang constantly with calls from his extended family. His aunts and uncles were taking sides. Some called to say they always knew Megan had problems, and they supported us completely. Others called to defend Megan and beg Ryan to drop the charges because she was family. Ryan's favorite uncle called and apologized for not recognizing how serious Megan's behavior had become over the years. He said he always thought she was just jealous and dramatic, but never imagined she'd cross into criminal territory. He offered to testify about Megan's past manipulative behavior if it would help our case. Ryan thanked him and said Cadence would be in touch. Going back to work was horrible. I'd missed a full week and returned emotionally devastated. My boss called me into her office the first day back and asked if everything was okay. I explained the basics of what happened without going into too much detail. Her expression shifted from concern to shock as I talked. She told me to take flexible hours for the next month to deal with legal proceedings and therapy appointments. She said my work was important, but my well-being mattered more. I thanked her and went back to my desk feeling slightly less overwhelmed. But I was barely sleeping and having panic attacks about what else Megan might have done that we hadn't discovered yet. Fletcher called a week after the arrests. His full forensics report was complete, and he'd found something disturbing. Megan had cloned our phones at some point, which explained how she knew our exact location and schedule in Bali. Phone cloning required physical access to the devices for several minutes. Ryan and I tried to remember when Megan could have done it. Then we remembered a family dinner 3 months ago at his parents' house. We'd left our phones on the kitchen counter while playing with their dog in the backyard. Megan had stayed inside claiming she had a headache. She must have used that time to clone both phones and install tracking software. Fletcher explained the cloning gave her access to our messages, emails, location data, and even our camera and microphone. She'd been spying on us for months before we even left for Bali. The cloning explained so much about how Megan tracked our every move in Bali. Aurora called 3 days after Fletcher's discovery with news that changed everything about the case. She'd been reviewing Megan's laptop files with the federal prosecutor and found detailed notes about installing spyware on our phones. The notes included timestamps showing Megan accessed our devices for over 20 minutes during that family dinner. She'd copied our contacts, passwords, banking information, and private photos. Aurora explained this elevated the charges significantly, because phone cloning qualified as identity theft under federal law. Each additional charge carried its own prison sentence that could stack on top of the existing charges. The prosecutor was building a case for maximum sentencing given the scope and planning involved. Aurora walked me through each new charge over the phone while I took notes. Illegal surveillance, identity theft, wire fraud, computer intrusion. She explained that Megan's planning documents showed clear intent and total lack of remorse. The prosecutors were pushing for 8 to 10 years instead of the original 3 to 5. I felt relief hearing those numbers because part of me worried Megan would get a slap on the wrist despite everything she'd done. Aurora promised to keep us updated as the case developed and reminded us not to discuss details publicly. 2 weeks later, Cadence called with frustrating news about Megan's defense strategy. Her attorney had filed motions suggesting Megan suffered from mental health issues and needed treatment rather than prison. The motion included a psychological evaluation from a doctor Megan's parents paid for claiming she had severe attachment disorder and separation anxiety related to Ryan. Cadence sounded annoyed reading the evaluation over the phone. The doctor argued Megan's behavior stemmed from trauma and mental illness rather than criminal intent. I asked if this meant Megan might avoid prison entirely. Cadence assured me the strategy wouldn't work, but we needed to prepare a strong counter-argument. She'd already contacted Aurora, who was preparing evidence showing Megan's elaborate planning proved she understood her actions completely. The international travel, coordination with multiple people, technological sophistication of the phone cloning, and careful staging of fake evidence all demonstrated clear thinking and ability to distinguish right from wrong. Cadence explained that insanity defenses only worked when someone genuinely couldn't understand their actions were criminal. Megan's detailed planning documents proved she knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. We scheduled a meeting to review our response to the mental health claims. Ryan's parents kept calling despite his repeated requests for no contact. His mother left voicemails crying and begging him to talk to her. His father sent texts saying we needed to discuss things as a family. Ryan deleted everything without listening or reading. But after 3 weeks of constant attempts, Cadence suggested we agree to one meeting with strict conditions. She'd be present as our representative. The meeting would happen at her office on neutral ground, and we'd leave immediately if his parents became hostile or manipulative. Ryan hesitated for 2 days before agreeing. He looked sick the morning of the meeting, barely touching his breakfast. We drove to Cadence's office in silence. His hands shook as we walked through the parking lot. His parents arrived 10 minutes after us. His mother's eyes were red and swollen like she'd been crying for days. His father looked older somehow, his face gray and tired. Cadence had us sit across a conference table from them with her at the head. His mother started talking immediately, her voice breaking as she begged Ryan to forgive Megan and not destroy the family. She said Megan made mistakes, but she was still his sister and families should stick together no matter what. Ryan's father sat silent, staring at the table. Ryan let his mother talk for 5 minutes before cutting her off. His voice came out steady and cold in a way I'd never heard. He told them they enabled Megan's worst behavior his entire life. Every time she manipulated someone or lied or sabotaged something, they made excuses and protected her from consequences. They taught her she could do anything without facing repercussions. That enabling turned her into a criminal who thought she could frame us for drug trafficking and ruin our lives. Until they accepted responsibility for their role in creating this situation, he couldn't have a relationship with them. His mother's face crumpled and she turned her attention to me. Her expression shifted from sad to angry in seconds. She said Megan was fine until I came along and stole her brother. Ryan was her whole world, and I destroyed that relationship by taking him away. Everything that happened was my fault for not understanding how close they were. Ryan slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make everyone jump. He told his mother that kind of thinking was exactly the problem. He was an adult who chose to get married. Megan's obsessive behavior wasn't normal sibling protectiveness. Their constant excuses for her actions taught her she could do anything without consequences. He pointed out that normal siblings don't fake stalking, plant drugs, or try to get their brother arrested. Normal siblings don't spend thousands of dollars traveling to another country to harass someone on their honeymoon. The fact that his mother still couldn't see how wrong Megan's behavior was proved she'd never hold her accountable. His father finally spoke, asking what Ryan wanted them to do. Ryan said he wanted them to admit Megan committed serious crimes and deserved serious punishment. He wanted them to stop making excuses and face reality. Until they could do that, he was done. His mother started crying harder, reaching across the table toward Ryan. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Cadence stood too, placing herself between Ryan and his parents. She thanked them for coming and said the meeting was over. We left through the back exit while his parents were still sitting at the conference table. Ryan shook the entire drive home. His hands trembled on the steering wheel and tears ran down his face. He pulled into our apartment parking lot and just sat there crying. I held his hand and waited. After 10 minutes, he told me he felt like he was losing his entire family, but he knew it was the right choice. His voice cracked on the words. I reminded him we were building our own family now, one based on honesty and healthy boundaries instead of manipulation and enabling. He nodded and squeezed my hand. We sat in the car for another 20 minutes before going inside. That night, he barely slept, tossing and turning beside me. I heard him crying quietly around 3 a.m. I held him and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would make it hurt less. The preliminary hearing was scheduled 3 weeks after Megan's arrest. Cadence explained we didn't have to attend, but our presence would show the judge we were serious about prosecution. We took the day off work and dressed formally. The courthouse was downtown in an old stone building with metal detectors at the entrance. We waited in the hallway outside the courtroom with Cadence and Aurora. Megan arrived with her attorney and her parents 20 minutes later. She wore a conservative navy dress and had her hair pulled back. She looked nothing like the woman who'd smiled while threatening us. When she saw us, her expression shifted to pure hatred. Her eyes locked on mine with such intensity I felt physically uncomfortable. Her attorney guided her into the courtroom quickly. The hearing itself was brief and procedural. The judge reviewed the charges while Megan stood beside her attorney. Her attorney argued for reduced charges, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, and the case was really just a family dispute blown out of proportion. The judge looked unimpressed. He reviewed Fletcher's forensics report, the video evidence from Bali, the laptop files, and the statements from Ashley and Josh. After 30 minutes of review, he stated there was sufficient cause for trial on all counts. Megan would face federal charges for interstate stalking, filing false police reports, identity theft, illegal surveillance, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Her bail conditions remained in place with additional restrictions on internet and phone use. The trial date was set for 4 months out. Megan's face went white as the judge read through each charge. Her attorney requested immediate reconsideration, but the judge denied it. We left the courthouse feeling cautiously optimistic. Ashley's plea deal was finalized the following week. Cadence called to tell us Ashley received probation and 200 hours of community service in exchange for her full cooperation. Josh got a harsher sentence with 6 months in county jail for his more active role in the live stream deception. Aurora explained their testimonies would be crucial at Megan's trial. Ashley's statement detailed every conversation she had with Megan about the plan, including texts and emails proving Megan orchestrated everything. Josh's statement described exactly how Megan coached him on what to do during the live stream, including the threatening sign and the phone call with the distorted voice. Aurora said their statements were detailed and damning. Megan's attorney would have a hard time discrediting them since they had nothing to gain by lying at this point. The physical evidence combined with eyewitness testimony from her own accomplices created an airtight case. I felt grateful that Ashley and Josh were willing to testify despite their own legal troubles. We started couples therapy the next week to process everything that happened. Our therapist was a woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and family conflict. The first session was mostly just explaining the situation and crying. She listened without judgment and took notes. The second session, she started helping us understand that Ryan wasn't responsible for his sister's choices or his parents' enabling. She explained that children from dysfunctional families often carry guilt that doesn't belong to them. Ryan had spent his whole life managing his sister's emotions and protecting her from consequences. Breaking that pattern felt like abandoning her, but really it was choosing health over dysfunction. The sessions were hard but necessary. We went every week and slowly started learning to communicate better about boundaries with his family and how to protect ourselves going forward. The therapist gave us homework like writing down our feelings and practicing saying no without guilt. Ryan struggled more than I did because he'd been trained his entire life to prioritize Megan's needs over his own. 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Megan violated the restraining order we'd obtained. She created a fake social media account using a random woman's photos and sent me threatening messages. The messages said I'd ruined her life and I'd pay for what I did to her family. She described in detail how she'd make me sorry. I screenshot everything and called Aurora immediately. Aurora contacted the police and Megan was arrested within hours. This time the judge was furious. He revoked her bail completely and ordered her held in custody until trial. Aurora called to tell us the news and said this actually helped our case significantly. It demonstrated Megan's inability to follow court orders and her ongoing danger to us. The judge's comments at the bail revocation hearing made it clear he viewed Megan as a serious threat who showed no signs of controlling her behavior. Megan's attorney tried to argue she was having a mental health crisis, but the judge wasn't buying it. He said someone capable of creating fake accounts and crafting detailed threats was capable of following a simple restraining order. Megan was transferred to the county jail to await trial. Ryan's uncle called 2 days after Megan's second arrest. He was Ryan's father's younger brother and had always been kind to us. He said he'd been following the case and wanted to offer support. He asked if we'd be willing to let him testify about Megan's history. Ryan put him on speaker, and we listened as he described years of Megan's manipulative behavior. She'd faked illnesses for attention since childhood. She sabotaged his daughter's engagement 5 years ago by telling lies about the fiancé. She stole jewelry from his wife during a family gathering and blamed it on a housekeeper who got fired. He said the whole extended family had stories about Megan, but everyone stayed quiet because Ryan's mother would cut off anyone who criticized her daughter. 2 of Ryan's cousins reached out the same week with similar offers. They shared stories about Megan spreading rumors, stealing, lying, and manipulating family members for years. One cousin said Megan tried to break up her marriage by sending fake texts to her husband. Another said Megan stole her identity to open credit cards and destroyed her credit score. The pattern of escalating antisocial behavior over many years was clear. Aurora said this testimony would establish Megan's behavior wasn't a one-time mistake or mental health crisis, but a long-established pattern of criminal conduct. The family members who came forward felt relieved to finally be able to speak the truth about what Megan had done. Cadence filed the civil lawsuit 3 weeks after the criminal charges were finalized. She walked us through every document, explaining how we'd itemized everything down to the last receipt. The honeymoon losses alone came to $18,000 between flights, hotels, and activities we'd prepaid. Therapy costs were mounting weekly at $200 per session. Ryan had missed work during the investigation and court appearances, losing nearly $4,000 in wages. The emotional distress was harder to quantify, but Cadence said our documented anxiety, sleep problems, and panic attacks justified another $20,000. She submitted medical records, therapy notes, bank statements, and a detailed timeline of every expense directly caused by Megan's actions. The filing went to court within days, and Megan's attorney immediately tried to get the amount reduced. He argued $50,000 was excessive for what he called a family dispute that got out of hand. Cadence showed up to that hearing with 3 banker's boxes full of evidence. She laid out every receipt on the table in front of the judge, organized by category with color-coded tabs. The judge spent 20 minutes reviewing the documentation while Megan's attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. When Cadence finished her presentation, the judge asked Megan's attorney if he had any receipts showing the damages were inflated. He didn't. The judge ruled the amount was completely justified and told Megan's attorney to stop wasting the court's time with frivolous motions. Aurora called 2 days later with news that made Ryan go pale. She'd been digging deeper into Megan's financial history as part of the criminal investigation and found something disturbing. Megan had opened 3 credit cards in Ryan's name over 2 years ago, right around the time we started dating. She'd been making minimum payments from her own account to keep them active and avoid detection. The total debt was nearly $15,000 spread across the cards. Aurora explained this added identity theft and fraud charges to Megan's growing list of crimes. Ryan sat at our kitchen table staring at his credit report on Aurora's laptop, his hands shaking. His credit score had dropped over 100 points because of the high balances and utilization. He'd been planning to apply for a promotion at work that required a security clearance, and this could have destroyed that opportunity. I watched him process the betrayal, realizing his sister had been stealing from him for years before she ever escalated to the stalking scheme. Aurora must have seen the devastation on his face because she quickly explained this actually helped our case significantly. It proved Megan's criminal behavior wasn't a sudden mental break or reaction to our relationship, but a pattern of calculated theft and manipulation that predated our marriage. The prosecution could now argue she'd been targeting Ryan financially long before the honeymoon incident, which showed premeditation and ongoing criminal intent rather than an isolated emotional outburst. The journalist's email arrived a week later while we were eating dinner. She was writing an article for a major online publication about family-perpetrated stalking and harassment. She'd found our case through public court records and wanted to know if we'd participate anonymously. I forwarded the email to Cadence before responding because I didn't trust anything anymore without legal approval. Cadence called back within an hour and said participating could be therapeutic and might help other people recognize similar patterns in their own families. She recommended we do it, but insist on complete anonymity with no identifying details. The journalist agreed to change names, locations, and any specific facts that could identify us. We spent 2 hours on a video call telling her everything while she took notes and occasionally stopped to verify details. She asked about warning signs we'd missed, how Megan's behavior escalated over time, and what we wished we'd known earlier. The article published 3 weeks later, and Cadence sent us the link. Reading it was strange because it was our story, but also not quite ours with all the changed details. The journalist had interviewed experts who explained how family members often get away with harassment longer because victims feel guilty about involving authorities or fear being accused of overreacting. The comments section filled up within hours. People shared their own stories about sisters who sabotaged weddings, brothers who stalked ex-partners, parents who filed false reports against their adult children. Reading those comments made me cry because we weren't alone in this nightmare. Dozens of people understood exactly what we'd been through because they'd survived similar situations. Megan's attorney contacted Aurora and Cadence the following week with a plea deal offer. Megan would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. She'd have to admit to filing false police reports, planting fake evidence, stalking us across international borders, and committing identity theft against Ryan. The deal would give her a permanent criminal record, but avoid the risk of a longer sentence if the case went to trial. Aurora called us into her office to discuss the offer with Cadence present. Both of them recommended we accept it. Aurora explained that trials were unpredictable no matter how strong the evidence was. Juries could be sympathetic to family dynamics, or confused by the complexity of the case. 2 years guaranteed prison time plus 5 years of supervised probation meant Megan would face real consequences and be monitored after release. The permanent criminal record would affect her employment, housing, and future opportunities for decades. Cadence added that going to trial would drag this out another 6 months minimum, and require us to testify in detail about everything. We'd have to relive the trauma repeatedly, while defense attorneys tried to make us look vindictive or exaggerating. Ryan and I talked about it for 3 days. Part of me wanted to see Megan get the maximum sentence possible after everything she'd done, but the thought of months more legal proceedings and having to face her in court testimony made me feel sick. We finally agreed to accept the plea deal because it guaranteed significant consequences without prolonging our suffering. The plea hearing got scheduled fast once we accepted the deal. We arrived at the courthouse 2 weeks later, and Cadence walked us through what would happen. Megan would have to allocute, which meant verbally admitting to each crime in detail before the judge would accept the plea. She couldn't just say guilty and be done. She had to describe what she did, when she did it, and acknowledge it was wrong. We sat in the gallery while Megan stood before the judge in her orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The judge asked if she understood she was giving up her right to trial, and she said yes in a flat voice. Then he made her go through each charge one by one. She had to admit she filed false police reports about a fake stalker to force us to come home from our honeymoon. She had to describe traveling to Bali to plant tracking devices and fake drugs in our hotel room. She had to acknowledge stealing Ryan's identity to open credit cards and stealing thousands of dollars over 2 years. She had to admit coordinating with accomplices to create fake evidence and live streams. Her voice stayed flat and resentful the entire time, never showing actual remorse. She was just going through the required motions to get the reduced sentence. Ryan squeezed my hand so hard during her statement that my fingers went numb. Watching her forced to say out loud everything she'd done gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected. She couldn't minimize it or make excuses or play victim. She had to own every single action in front of a judge and court reporters, and anyone in the public gallery. The judge accepted the plea but didn't just move on to sentencing. He spent 10 minutes lecturing Megan about the seriousness of what she'd done. He talked about how she'd abused family relationships and violated trust in ways that caused lasting damage. He pointed out that she'd committed federal crimes by crossing international borders to harass us, and could have destroyed our lives if the fake drugs had been real. He said her complete lack of remorse during the allocution concerned him greatly, and suggested she had deep psychological issues that needed serious treatment. Then he ordered her to begin serving her sentence immediately with no delay. She'd go straight from the courthouse to the state prison to start her 2 years. He also mandated mental health treatment during incarceration, and made it a condition of her eventual probation. Aurora leaned over and whispered that this was the best possible outcome short of a longer sentence from trial. The judge clearly understood how dangerous Megan was and wasn't giving her any breaks despite the plea deal. Megan's face went white when the bailiffs came to escort her out. She looked back at Ryan one last time, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes before they led her away. Ryan's parents tried to approach us in the courthouse hallway after the hearing ended. His mother was crying and reaching for Ryan while his father stood behind her looking defeated. Ryan stepped in front of me and told them firmly that we weren't ready for contact, and might never be. His mother started wailing about losing both her children, and how could Ryan do this to the family? She acted like Ryan was the one who'd committed crimes instead of the daughter who'd just been sentenced to prison. Cadence appeared beside us and put herself between Ryan's parents and us. She told them in a sharp professional voice that they needed to step back immediately. Then she said something that made Ryan's mother go silent. Cadence explained that the prosecution was still considering whether to charge them as accomplices for their knowing participation in Megan's scheme. The emails between Ryan's mother and Megan proved she knew about the fake stalking and helped coordinate the emergency calls. That made her potentially liable for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Ryan's father could face charges too for the role he played in the phone calls that forced us home. Cadence said they should consider themselves lucky they hadn't been charged yet, and stop harassing us if they wanted to keep it that way. She guided us toward a side exit while Ryan's mother screamed after us about ungrateful children and family loyalty. We got in Cadence's car and she drove us home while explaining the legal situation with Ryan's parents. She said prosecutors probably wouldn't charge them unless they continued interfering or tried to help Megan somehow, but the threat would hopefully keep them away from us while we healed. The civil lawsuit concluded a month after Megan started serving her prison sentence. She failed to mount any defense because she was in prison and had no money for attorneys after spending everything on her criminal defense. The judge awarded us the full $50,000 plus legal fees by default. Cadence explained that actually collecting the money would be difficult since Megan had almost no assets. Her apartment was rented and her car was leased. Her bank accounts had been drained paying for lawyers, but we could garnish her wages after she got out of prison in 2 years. The court would take a percentage of every paycheck she earned until the full amount plus interest was paid. The judgment was good for 20 years, so we had plenty of time to collect. Cadence filed all the paperwork to set up automatic garnishment that would kick in as soon as Megan had any income. It wouldn't give us our money back immediately, but knowing she'd be paying us for years after release felt like ongoing accountability for what she'd done. 2 months into Megan's sentence, Ryan's father called my phone. Ryan had blocked his parents' numbers, but his father must have gotten mine from somewhere. I answered cautiously, and he asked if we could meet to talk. Just him, not Ryan's mother. He said he'd separated from her because he finally understood how her enabling had destroyed their family. He was living in an apartment downtown and going to therapy twice a week, trying to process his own role in the dysfunction. His voice sounded different from I'd ever heard it. Tired and sad, but also honest in a way he'd never been before. I told him I'd talk to Ryan and get back to him. Ryan's first reaction was anger that his father had contacted us at all. But after thinking about it overnight, he said he wanted to hear what his father had to say. We agreed to meet at a neutral location with me present. The coffee shop was busy enough that we had privacy, but public enough that we felt safe. Ryan's father showed up early and was waiting at a corner table when we arrived. He looked older than I remembered, with new gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. He stood up when he saw us but didn't try to hug Ryan or shake hands. He just gestured to the chairs and waited for us to sit first. The conversation started slowly with awkward silence. Then Ryan's father began talking and didn't stop for almost an hour. He apologized for everything without making excuses. He said he should have stopped his wife from enabling Megan years ago when the problems first started. He admitted he'd known Megan was manipulative and cruel, but he'd taken the easy path of going along with whatever his wife wanted instead of protecting Ryan. He acknowledged that his passivity had been just as damaging as his wife's active enabling. He talked about therapy and what he was learning about codependency and family systems. He said he was filing for divorce because his wife refused to accept any responsibility or change her behavior. She still believed Megan was the victim, and we were the villains. He couldn't stay married to someone who enabled criminal behavior and blamed the victims. Then he asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding a relationship over time. He said he understood if Ryan said no. He knew he'd failed as a father and didn't deserve forgiveness. But if Ryan was willing to try, he wanted to prove he could be different. Ryan looked at me across the coffee shop table, and I could see him trying to decide if his father deserved another chance. I squeezed his hand under the table and nodded slightly because this decision had to be his. Ryan took a deep breath and told his father we'd be willing to try supervised contact on a trial basis. His father's face flooded with relief, but Ryan held up a hand to stop him from speaking. Ryan explained the conditions clearly and firmly. His father needed to maintain complete boundaries with Ryan's mother, and never pressure us about forgiving Megan. He couldn't share information about our lives with her, or act as a messenger between us. If he violated these boundaries even once, contact would end permanently. His father agreed immediately, and asked what supervised contact would look like. I suggested he could join our therapy sessions occasionally so we'd have a professional present to help navigate the family dynamics. Our therapist had already approved this idea when I'd called her the day before. Ryan's father said he'd do whatever we asked and thanked us for giving him this opportunity. The first therapy session with Ryan's father happened 2 weeks later, and it was awkward at first with long silences and careful words. But our therapist guided the conversation skillfully and helped Ryan's father understand how his passivity had enabled the toxic family patterns. He cried when Ryan described feeling abandoned and unprotected throughout his childhood. By the end of the session, we'd made real progress in establishing healthier communication patterns. Ryan's father started attending every other therapy session, and the work was slow but genuine. Work became easier as the legal stress finally started to resolve, and I could focus on my job again instead of constantly worrying about court dates and evidence. My boss called me into her office one morning, and I tensed automatically because meetings with her still triggered anxiety after months of requesting time off for legal proceedings. But she smiled and told me to sit down because she had good news. She explained that the company was opening a new department, and she wanted me to lead it as a senior manager. The promotion came with a significant raise that was almost 30% more than my current salary. I felt tears prick my eyes because this felt like validation that my career hadn't been destroyed by Megan's schemes. I accepted gratefully and thanked her for believing in me through everything. She said I'd earned it through my work quality and professionalism even during impossible circumstances. The extra income would help us rebuild our savings after losing so much money to Megan's manipulation. Having professional success felt like reclaiming control over my life after months of feeling powerless. I called Ryan from my car during lunch to tell him the news, and he was so excited he actually yelled into the phone. He said he was proud of me and we should celebrate with a nice dinner that weekend. 2 weeks after my promotion, Ryan came home from work looking dazed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. He told me his supervisor had called him in for a meeting and he'd been terrified it was bad news. Instead, his supervisor had heard about what we'd been through from another colleague whose wife knew Cadence. His supervisor said he was impressed by how Ryan had handled such an impossible situation with integrity and strength. The company was promoting Ryan to a senior position in his department with a substantial raise and better benefits. Ryan's voice cracked when he told me because he'd been worried his family drama would damage his career. Instead, his honesty and character had been recognized and rewarded. The raise meant we could start seriously looking at buying a house instead of renting. We'd been talking about it cautiously, but hadn't felt financially stable enough after losing our honeymoon savings. Now with both our new salaries, we could actually afford a down payment and monthly mortgage. That night we sat on our couch with our laptops looking at real estate listings and dreaming about having our own place. A house felt like a positive step toward building the future Megan had tried to destroy. We wanted something that was completely ours with no connection to Ryan's family or the nightmare they'd put us through. A month later, we decided to take a weekend trip to a nearby city about 3 hours away. It would be our first vacation since the honeymoon disaster, and I was nervous about traveling again. Ryan was too, but we both knew we needed to prove to ourselves that we could have normal, happy experiences. We chose a city close enough that we could drive home quickly if needed, but far enough to feel like an actual getaway. I packed our bags carefully and checked 3 times that we had everything, because the Bali trip had made me paranoid about forgetting important items. The drive was beautiful with fall colors covering the hills, and Ryan held my hand while he drove. We stayed at a small boutique hotel downtown and spent the weekend exploring museums, trying new restaurants and walking through parks. It was healing to just be together without stress or fear. We were both more cautious and aware of our surroundings than we used to be. I caught myself checking over my shoulder in crowds, and Ryan admitted he'd been doing the same thing. But we were also learning to relax and trust that we were safe now. Megan was in prison and couldn't hurt us anymore. On Sunday morning, we had brunch at a cafe with outdoor seating, and Ryan said this felt like the honeymoon we should have had. I agreed and suggested we should do trips like this regularly to build positive travel memories. The weekend reminded us that our life could be good again, despite everything that had happened. Aurora called 2 weeks after our weekend trip to tell us she was officially closing the federal investigation. She'd completed her final report and wanted to share some of the outcomes with us. She explained that our case had led to improved security protocols at airports for detecting fake drug plants. TSA was implementing new training procedures to help agents identify staged evidence versus actual contraband. The changes would help protect other innocent travelers from similar frame jobs. Aurora thanked us for our cooperation throughout the investigation and said our willingness to prosecute fully had helped establish legal precedent for family stalking cases. Other victims could now point to our case when seeking justice against relatives who crossed into criminal behavior. She said prosecutors in 3 other states had already contacted her office asking for details about how we'd built our case. Hearing that our nightmare might help other people made it feel slightly more meaningful. Aurora wished us well and said to contact her if we ever needed anything. I thanked her for believing us from the beginning when we must have sounded crazy explaining about Megan's elaborate schemes. She said good investigators learn to recognize truth even when it sounds impossible. A week after Aurora's call, Fletcher contacted us and invited us to dinner at his house. He said he wanted to thank us properly because our case had advanced his forensics research in ways he hadn't expected. The techniques he'd developed analyzing our evidence had applications for other cases involving planted evidence and staged crime scenes. Ryan and I accepted the invitation and drove to the Ferguson family home on Saturday evening. Fletcher's wife was warm and welcoming, and their 2 teenage daughters were polite and curious about us. Hope and Macy were there too with their families, and it felt like a reunion. We spent the evening eating amazing food and sharing stories about the investigation. Fletcher showed us his published research paper that cited our case as a primary example. It felt surreal to see our trauma turned into academic documentation, but also validating that something good came from it. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged phone numbers with everyone and made plans to get together again. Having connections to people who believed us and helped bring justice was deeply comforting. The Ferguson family understood the trauma in ways our other friends couldn't, because they'd been there through the worst of it. They'd seen the evidence and knew exactly how calculated and cruel Megan's schemes had been. 6 months after Megan's incarceration, we received a letter forwarded through Cadence from a prison therapist. The therapist explained she was working with Megan on rehabilitation and wondered if we'd be willing to participate in family therapy sessions. She described it as an important part of Megan's recovery process and said our participation could help her take accountability for her actions. I read the letter twice to make sure I understood correctly, and then handed it to Ryan without comment. He read it and his face went red with anger. We called Cadence immediately and she wasn't surprised because she'd seen similar requests in other cases. We told her to decline firmly and explained that we had no interest in helping Megan's recovery. Our focus was on our own healing, and we didn't owe Megan anything after what she'd done. Cadence drafted a response making our position clear and sent it to the prison therapist. She explained that victims aren't required to participate in their abuser's rehabilitation, and our refusal didn't make us vindictive or unforgiving. We were simply protecting ourselves and our peace. Ryan said he felt guilty for about 5 minutes before remembering everything Megan had done. I reminded him that Megan had tried to get us arrested for drug trafficking and destroy our entire future. We didn't owe her forgiveness or participation in her therapy. 2 weeks after declining the prison therapy request, Ryan's mother sent a letter to our apartment. Ryan stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before opening it because he knew it wouldn't be good. The letter was 3 pages of his mother attempting reconciliation, but it was full of excuses for Megan and subtle blame toward me. She wrote about how Megan had always struggled with jealousy and needed extra support from family. She claimed Megan's actions came from a place of pain and fear of losing her brother. She suggested that if I had been more understanding of Megan's feelings from the beginning, things never would have escalated. The letter made me furious because she still couldn't take full responsibility or acknowledge the severity of Megan's crimes. Ryan read it twice and then sat down to write a response. He told me he needed to do this one final time to make his position absolutely clear. His letter was short and direct, explaining that until she took full responsibility without qualifications or justifications, we couldn't have a relationship. He wrote that her continued enabling and excuse-making showed she hadn't learned anything. He said he was returning all future letters unopened and she shouldn't contact us again. He mailed the letter that afternoon and blocked her email address. I watched him do it and saw both sadness and relief on his face. We started planning to renew our vows on our 2nd anniversary with a small ceremony in Bali. The idea came up during a therapy session when our therapist asked about reclaiming positive experiences. Ryan suggested returning to Bali to finish what Megan had interrupted and create new happy memories. I loved the idea immediately because it felt empowering and symbolic. We'd let Megan's schemes cut short our honeymoon, but we wouldn't let her ruin Bali forever. We started researching venues and reached out to Stefan at the hotel where everything had unraveled. He remembered us and was enthusiastic about hosting our vow renewal ceremony. He offered us a complimentary upgrade and said he'd personally oversee all the arrangements. We planned a small, intimate ceremony on the beach at sunset, with just the 2 of us and an officiant. We'd spend 2 weeks in Bali actually enjoying our honeymoon without fear or interruption. The planning process was exciting and healing because we were taking back control of our narrative. Megan had tried to destroy our marriage before it even started, but instead we were celebrating our survival and commitment. Therapy continued helping us process residual trust issues and anxiety that lingered even after Megan was in prison. Our therapist noted that we'd both shown remarkable resilience in turning trauma into growth, instead of letting it destroy us. She said many couples wouldn't have survived what we'd been through. We were communicating better than ever, because the crisis had forced us to be completely honest and vulnerable with each other. Ryan had learned to set boundaries with toxic family members and prioritize our marriage over obligation. I'd learned to trust my instincts and stand up for myself even when it meant confronting his family. Our relationship was stronger for having survived this test, and we both knew we could handle whatever life threw at us. We were genuinely excited about our future together in ways we hadn't been able to be during the investigation and legal proceedings. The anxiety would probably never completely disappear, but it was manageable now. We had tools for coping and a support system of people who believed us. Most importantly, we had each other and a commitment to building a healthy life together. Ryan's father started meeting us for dinner once a month at a quiet restaurant halfway between our apartment and his new place. The first few dinners were awkward with long silences between careful conversations about work and weather, but he never once mentioned Megan or asked us to forgive her. He talked about his therapy sessions and what he was learning about enabling behaviors, and he apologized again for not protecting Ryan from the family dysfunction when he was growing up. By the third dinner, he was sharing stories about his childhood that helped us understand where the patterns started, and Ryan opened up about memories he'd buried for years. His father listened without making excuses or defending anyone, just acknowledging the pain and taking responsibility for his part in it. We gradually increased contact to twice-monthly dinners and occasional weekend coffee, and it felt good to have at least one family member who respected our boundaries and showed genuine change through consistent actions rather than empty promises. 3 months after Megan's sentencing, I received an email from a victims advocacy organization asking if we'd consider speaking at their annual conference about family crimes. The coordinator explained they were trying to raise awareness about how family members can be perpetrators of serious crimes and how victims often face pressure to minimize or excuse the behavior because of family ties. I forwarded the email to Ryan, and we spent a week discussing whether we were ready to share our story publicly, even in an anonymous format. Our therapist helped us work through the decision and pointed out that speaking might help us reclaim our narrative and transform the trauma into something meaningful. We agreed to present on the condition that we could use fake names and no identifying details would be shared, and the organization immediately accepted our terms and sent us the conference schedule. The conference was held at a hotel downtown on a Saturday morning, and we arrived early feeling nervous but prepared after spending 2 weeks writing and rehearsing our presentation. We'd titled it, Warning Signs We Missed, When Family Manipulation Becomes Criminal Behavior, and structured it around the escalation pattern from Megan's early sabotage attempts to the elaborate international scheme. Standing behind the podium in a room full of advocates, therapists, and other victims, I felt my hands shake as I started describing how Megan wore black to our wedding and called it appropriate for a funeral. Ryan took over for the middle section about the fake stalking scheme, his voice steady as he explained how his family's enabling had taught Megan she could do anything without consequences. We showed redacted versions of some evidence, including the metadata from the pre-staged photos and the security footage from Bali, and the audience gasped when we revealed that Megan had followed us internationally to frame us for drug trafficking. The presentation ended with our advice about trusting your instincts even when family members insist you're overreacting, documenting everything carefully, and not letting guilt or obligation prevent you from holding criminals accountable regardless of their relationship to you. After we finished, at least a dozen people approached us to share their own stories of family members who'd escalated from manipulation to criminal acts. A woman in her 50s told us her brother had stalked her for 3 years before finally being arrested, and her parents still insisted she was being dramatic and should drop the charges. A young man described how his sister had stolen his identity and destroyed his credit, but his family expected him to forgive her because that's what family does. An older couple explained that their son had embezzled from their business and threatened them when they reported it to police, and they'd been ostracized by extended family for sending their own child to prison. Each story reinforced that we weren't alone in facing family members who used the relationship to avoid accountability, and that choosing justice over obligation was the right decision even when it felt impossibly hard. Several attendees asked for copies of our presentation materials to use in their own advocacy work, and the conference coordinator thanked us for being willing to speak openly about such a painful experience. Walking out of the hotel that afternoon, Ryan squeezed my hand and said he felt like our suffering finally had some purpose beyond just surviving it. Exactly 1 year after Megan started serving her sentence, we received official notification from the parole board that she was eligible for early release based on good behavior and participation in prison programs. The letter explained we had the right to submit a victim impact statement that would be reviewed during her parole hearing, and the deadline was 3 weeks away. I felt my stomach drop reading those words because the idea of Megan being released early felt like the system was failing us after we'd worked so hard to hold her accountable. Ryan called Cadence immediately and she walked us through the process, explaining that victim impact statements carry significant weight in parole decisions, and we should be detailed and specific about the ongoing effects of Megan's crimes. We spent the next 2 weeks writing and revising a 5-page statement that described the financial losses we'd never fully recovered, the anxiety and trust issues we still dealt with daily, the damage to Ryan's relationship with his entire extended family, and our genuine fear about what Megan might do if released before completing her full sentence. We explained that she'd shown no real remorse during the plea hearing and had violated the restraining order within weeks of being released on bail, which proved she couldn't be trusted to follow rules or respect boundaries. Cadence reviewed our final draft and made a few suggestions to strengthen the legal language, then submitted it to the parole board on our behalf along with supporting documentation, including the restraining order violation and statements from our therapist about ongoing trauma symptoms. 2 weeks later, Aurora called with news that made me actually cry with relief. The parole board had denied Megan's early release request after reviewing our victim impact statement, along with her prison records showing minimal engagement with required therapy and a pattern of resentful attitude toward staff and other inmates. Aurora explained that Megan would now serve her full 2-year sentence with no possibility of early release, and she'd remain on probation for 5 years after that, with strict conditions including no contact with us and mandatory mental health treatment. The decision validated everything we'd been through and proved that the system was actually protecting us instead of prioritizing family reconciliation over victim safety. Ryan's father called that evening after we'd texted him the news, and he said he was proud of us for standing firm and relieved that Megan would serve the full sentence she deserved. We started seriously looking at houses the following month, determined to buy something in a neighborhood Megan would never think to look for us, and taking extra precautions to keep all our information private. Our realtor was a recommendation from the Ferguson family, who understood our security concerns and helped us focus on properties with good natural surveillance, solid locks, and space for security systems. We toured at least 15 houses over 6 weeks, rejecting several that felt too isolated or had too many access points we'd need to monitor. The house we finally fell in love with was a small 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood with friendly neighbors, a fenced backyard, and a security system already installed by the previous owners. We put in an offer the same day we saw it and started the mortgage process, carefully ensuring that all our documents listed only a P.O. box and that the title company understood our privacy requirements. The inspection revealed only minor issues and closing was scheduled for early March, which would be 3 weeks before our second anniversary. Ryan's father continued improving and surprising us with his growth, and during one of our dinners in late February, he quietly told us he'd filed for divorce from Ryan's mother. She'd refused to attend therapy or acknowledge any responsibility for enabling Megan, and she'd actually tried to pressure Ryan's father to convince us to write a letter supporting Megan's early release. He'd realized he couldn't stay married to someone who still prioritized protecting Megan over accepting reality, and he was building a new life based on honesty and healthy relationships, instead of obligation and dysfunction. Ryan asked his father if he was okay, and his father smiled and said he felt freer than he had in 30 years, like he'd finally stopped carrying weight that was never his to carry. We were cautiously optimistic about maintaining a relationship with him going forward, because his actions consistently matched his words, and he never pressured us or made excuses for the rest of the family. Closing day arrived on a perfect sunny morning in early March, and we sat in the title company office signing what felt like 1,000 documents, while our realtor smiled and congratulated us. Walking into our house for the first time as actual owners felt surreal and emotional, like we'd finally reached the life we should have had 2 years ago before Megan destroyed our honeymoon. The house was completely ours with no connection to Ryan's family, and no shared memories of dysfunction or manipulation. Just empty rooms waiting to be filled with furniture and experiences that reflected our values and our future. We spent the first weekend painting the bedroom and setting up our new security system with cameras covering all entry points, and even though we knew Megan was still in prison, having those protections in place helped us feel safe. Ryan's father came over to help us move furniture and brought a housewarming gift of new kitchen knives with a card that said, "For building the life you deserve." Moving boxes filled our living room for weeks, but slowly we transformed the empty house into a real home. Our vow renewal trip to Bali was scheduled for late March to coincide with our actual anniversary date, and this time we planned everything carefully with no family members knowing our exact location or timeline. We flew out on a Tuesday morning and arrived in Bali exhausted but excited to finally have the honeymoon we'd been denied 2 years earlier. Stefan from hotel security met us personally in the lobby and gave us a complimentary upgrade to an ocean view suite as thanks for helping them identify and fix the security gaps that had allowed Megan to access our original room. He walked us through all the new protocols they'd implemented, including better keycard tracking, additional cameras, and stricter staff verification procedures, and he assured us we were completely safe and could actually relax this time. The next 2 weeks were everything we'd hoped for back when we first planned this trip, with long beach days, romantic dinners, spa treatments, and excursions to temples and rice terraces without constantly looking over our shoulders. We renewed our vows in a simple ceremony on the beach at sunset, with just us and an officiant, speaking promises to each other that felt even more meaningful after everything we'd survived together. The hotel photographer captured the moment, and we finally had wedding photos that showed genuine joy instead of the tension that had marked our original ceremony with Megan glaring in black in the background. Back home in early April, we hosted a celebration at our new house with everyone who'd supported us through the nightmare of the past 2 years. The guest list included close friends from work, our therapist, the entire Ferguson family who'd become genuine friends, and Ryan's father who brought his new girlfriend and seemed genuinely happy for the first time since we'd known him. We set up tables in the backyard and served food we'd actually enjoyed in Bali, sharing stories about the trip and showing photos from the vow renewal ceremony. Hope Ferguson raised her glass and made a toast about resilience and choosing your own family based on love and respect rather than obligation, and everyone clinked glasses and cheered. The gathering felt full of authentic warmth and support, without any of the toxic dynamics or hidden agendas that had poisoned every event with Ryan's original family, and looking around at people who genuinely cared about our happiness made all the pain feel worth surviving. A week after the celebration, Cadence called with news about the civil judgment. The garnishment paperwork was finalized and ready to execute the day Megan was released from prison. She explained the process in her usual efficient way, walking me through how portions of Megan's wages would be automatically deducted and sent to us until the full $50,000 plus accumulated interest was paid. The system would track every payment and adjust for any employment changes Megan made, following her from job to job if necessary. Knowing there would be ongoing consequences even after she served her prison time brought a sense of relief I hadn't expected. Ryan and I discussed it over dinner that night, both of us agreeing that the financial accountability mattered less than the principle that her actions had real, lasting repercussions she couldn't escape. 2 years passed faster than I imagined possible. Our house became a real home filled with furniture we picked together and photos from trips we took without fear. Ryan's career advanced steadily after his promotion, and my own position at work grew into a role I genuinely loved, with responsibilities that challenged me in good ways. We established routines that felt healthy and normal, like Sunday morning coffee on the back porch, and Friday night dinners with the Ferguson family who'd become our closest friends. Therapy helped us build communication skills that made our marriage stronger than it had been even before Megan's schemes disrupted everything. We learned to set boundaries with people who tried to take advantage of our kindness, recognizing red flags we'd missed before. Ryan's relationship with his father continued improving slowly, built on honesty and respect rather than obligation. We started talking seriously about having kids, excited to create a family based on the values we'd fought so hard to protect. The trauma Megan inflicted transformed into wisdom about choosing who we let into our lives and standing firm when someone tries to manipulate us through guilt or family pressure.